right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, I might be sort of maybe the STEM piece of the talk tonight, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I've done in what I would call the biomechanics of the upper extremity. What that means is the forces on the arm in throwing. And I'm going to specifically talk about baseball pitching, but really this research would apply to any other sport that involves throwing. So it's pretty relevant to, for example, hitters in volleyball. It's relevant to, in Europe, they play team handball, which involves a lot of throwing. So a lot of this research would apply to other sports besides baseball. Okay, so why do I care about baseball? I mean, who really cares, right? Well, it turns out that a lot of Americans do. The statistics say that something like, if you survey people in the United States, something like 50% of them will say that they follow Major League Baseball, right? So 50% of 300 million is 150 million people, even just in the United States. That's a pretty big number. So even if you look at current events, right? Last night in the first game of the World Series, over 18 million people watched that game, right? How many of you here are Cubs fans? Anyone? Sorry, yeah. Yeah, no,
They're playing right now.
I'm going to show some video from the game last night because the pitching was really good. Unfortunately, the outcome, if you're a Cubs fan, was probably not what you were hoping for. But one of the reasons I'm interested in throwing is not just because baseball is considered one of America's favorite pastimes. It's because it's an extremely ballistic motion. So people that have measured the rotation of the arm in throwing have clocked the arm in a professional pitcher going something like 7,000 degrees per second, which is something like 1,460 RPMs, right? If the degrees per second doesn't help you. So anyway, it's really, really fast motion. And because of that, it's extremely dangerous. And so people get injured. Pitchers are well known for getting injured, and in some cases, catastrophically. So we know a lot more about pitching and the mechanics of pitching than we did years ago. But even though we know that, and the way we train athletes, and the way we rehabilitate athletes, and the strength and conditioning that they go through, even with all of that expert knowledge, pitchers are still getting increasingly injured. And they're getting injured at an increasing rate, even with all of that expert knowledge. So something is clearly out of whack. And to me, it's interesting that professional pitchers, understanding what happens to professional pitchers and trying to help them to perform at their best. But maybe even more important to me is thinking about youth pitchers, right? If you think about all of the kids, even just in the United States, that are playing t-ball, softball, and baseball, it's tens or hundreds of thousands of kids, right? And so if there's anything we can do to help protect them, to keep them from getting injured, or to help them perform better so that they can enjoy a sport that they like for longer, then that would be fantastic. And so that's one of my primary motivations, is to basically be able to prevent injuries in people that play throwing sports. So one thing that I want to point out, I'm going to talk about both professional athletes and youth athletes today. There are different kinds of injuries that the two groups get. So when a certain kind of force on a joint of an adult pitcher might cause a ligamentous sprain or strain, that can cause a very different injury in a kid, because the kids have open growth plates, right? And their skeleton is just much more plastic, meaning that it's more adaptable to the loads applied to it. And also, in general, for body mass, youth players tend to have less muscle mass and be more flexible. So the combination of the fact that their skeleton is different and their flexibility and their strength are different mean that they can get different kinds of injuries. And the injuries can involve the growth plate, and so those can be really need to be treated cautiously. All right, so this is an image from the game last night. This is Corey Kluber, and he had a pretty amazing outing. He struck out, I think, at 1.9 in a row, or he had 9 strikeouts in 6 innings. I put this here just for a second so everybody can take a minute and just look at the pitching motion. If you've never really thought about it or never studied it closely, just watch what he's doing once or twice here. Before I move on, I'm going to kind of break apart the pitch, talk about the different parts of it, and talk about what's going on in his, today I'm going to focus on the shoulder, what's going on in his shoulder during the different parts of that motion. Okay, so I've got here kind of a schematic of the different events of the pitch, all right? So away on The left-hand side is going to be the initial event of the pitch, which usually is considered something around when the pitcher removes the ball from his or her glove. Okay? So way on the right, you have the beginning of the pitch, the ball's coming out of the glove. There are three really important events that kind of determine when big things happen in the pitch. So the first is called stride foot contact, right? So stride foot contact is the pitcher has the ball in the glove, removes it, usually takes a big step forward, and when that front foot hits the ground, that's stride foot contact. So for a lot of people, that's kind of the beginning of the propulsive part of the pitch, where actually the pitcher's body moves forward and they're accelerating the ball to get it up to whatever speed that they're going to be pitching at. So that's called the stride foot contact. Maximal external rotation is so that we've taken this big step forward, right? The pitcher's driven his or her body forward. And now the ball is up here, and the arm gets externally rotated, right? So it gets into what we call a cocked position, getting ready to then accelerate the ball forward. So maximal external rotation means rotation of the shoulder, right, into this position. I can't get anywhere near as much external rotation as a real pitcher can, but it means getting into this position. Okay? And then from that position, the ball is accelerated forward and released. And so release is, for most people, kind of the end of the pitch, right? Or the end of the interesting part of the pitch. So one thing I want to point out on my diagram, I put some percentages here. So people have different styles of pitching, right? But from the time they take the ball out of the glove until stride for contact, it takes approximately 40% of their total time of the pitch, okay? So it's relatively long duration, and it's quite variable. Different people have very different styles. If you look at the amount of time from stride foot contact to maximum external rotation, that's the time that you're basically moving the arm into that cocked position. That's about another 40% of the pitching motion. And then the time to accelerate from that position until release is 10%. So not surprisingly, it's much quicker than actually, it takes a long time to get the ball in the position. It doesn't take very long to get it out of position and release it. So even though these pictures look evenly spaced, in time they're happening much more quickly together, right? These two pictures, maximal external rotation and release, they happen in time very close to one another. And so we call this the cocking phase, when the ball is moved into a position to be thrown, and then the acceleration phase, that's as being thrown forward. And I'm talking about that because those instants in time, especially the time of maximal external rotation and the time of ball release, are when two of the really big forces happen to the arm, or to the shoulder in this case. We're going to focus primarily on the shoulder. They can cause injury in pitchers, and often does cause injury. Okay. So we walk through those. All right. So I'm going to be presenting some data that I collected here several years ago, and it comes from two studies. One study was of professional baseball pitchers. These were pitchers that were pitching in the Cactus League spring training down in Arizona. So they were professional pitchers, and they were pitching during the season. So we collected data from 25 pitchers. Their average pitch speed was about 87 miles an hour. And to give you an idea, they were about 2 meters tall, right? So a little over 6 feet tall. And then we had 14 youth pitchers. These guys were about 12 years old. They were all boys. And they were throwing about 48 miles per hour, so not quite half the pitch speed of the professional pitchers. So not surprisingly, also there was quite a big size difference, right? The 12-year-olds were just overall shorter and way less than the professional pitchers. All the data we looked at was for pitchers throwing fastballs that were strikes, so they were what we consider a good pitch. And we use a technique called motion analysis. So I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail about how that's done, but there's two primary ways we can collect this data. The old school way was we used to use video cameras. We'd take two different views of the subjects. There was a special procedure we would go through to calibrate the locations of the cameras. And then from knowing what the pitcher's motion looked like in each of the views, we could basically figure out the motion of their body in 3D space. Well, today we have fancy camera systems that can do that in a much quicker way. And those are the same systems that they use in the animation industry. So if you've ever seen like a commercial for a video game where somebody's in a black suit with little balls on them and they're collecting their motion for a video game, we use those same techniques to track the motion of a person. Okay? So I use those techniques to track the motion of the person pitching for the entire duration of the pitch. All right. When I do that, then I get data that I can graph. And there's a lot going on here, but I'm just going to give you the real gist of what these graphs mean. going to show you 3 of these graphs. Each is really just set up to kind of indicate one particular thing about the pitching motion that's I think is interesting or important. Okay, so this one is just looking at the angle of the shoulder as a function of time during the pitch. So way on the left-hand side, starting at 0% of the pitch, is at the very beginning when they're just removing the ball from the glove. And at the end is after release. And you'll see 2 stripes, a red one and a blue one. The red one is for the Little League players, the 12-year-olds, and the blue one is for the professional pitchers. And so what you see is as a function of time, the arm goes from a position, this is 0 degrees, this is 90 degrees, and 180 degrees would be something like that that I can't actually demonstrate, okay? So if you look at the peak of those curves, you see that the Little Leaguers actually get to like 160-something degrees, right? So they get about to right there, at the max position during the pitch. And the professional pitchers actually get to over 180, right? So that means not only would his arm be pointing backwards, it'd be pointing a little bit down behind him, right? So literally this, which I can't even do, right? I would basically twist my arm right off my body if I need to try. So that's pretty amazing when you think about it, right? That his hand could actually be pointing behind him and down a little bit while he's going. So as you can imagine, that's a pretty extreme position. Probably could be bad news if you don't do it right or if it's not controlled well, right? So pretty interesting when you actually look at this. Okay. So while that's going on, where you're in this crazy position that's probably for most of us not physically possible, there's some pretty big forces going on. So in this particular one, what's being measured now is, it's an indication, it's called a torque. Okay, that's a twisting motion or a tendency to twist something. This torque basically indicates what the muscles of the shoulder or the rotator cuff are doing to the proximal end, the shoulder end of the upper arm. Okay, so the arrow there represents that there's a twisting going this direction. That twisting means that the muscles of the arm are tending to do this, right? They're trying to internally rotate the arm. So they're doing that around the time that the arm was in that max external rotation position. So what that means is that the arm is moving out this way, and at the same time these muscles are twisting this way and trying to get it ready to accelerate the ball forward, which is what is going to happen next, right? It makes sense. So I want to point out that is occurring right around the time of that max external rotation, right? So the time we get this really crazy joint position, we get this really relatively large torque that's twisting the arm. So what does that mean? It means that, if you look at the picture here, you've got a twisting of the humerus. The humerus is the upper arm bone, right? Say this is my upper arm bone. Well, I'm twisting it like a washcloth, bringing out a washcloth, right? So on one end I'm twisting inward, the other end it's getting twisted outward. So you can see what happens to the line on this thing, right? It goes crooked. So that's what your humerus is trying to do, right? That's the load that's being placed on it during a pitch. So what does that lead to? Why do we care? This combination of the torque on the humerus is thought to be the root cause for several different kinds of injuries. So I'm going to talk about each of those briefly. All right. There's one other thing going on, and I'm going to talk about that briefly, then we'll go through all the injuries, okay? So this time, another graph, but this time, if you look, I've got, again, Little Leaguers in red, professional pitchers in blue. There's this trough, right? It's a negative number, but the biggest negative number for both groups, but it's really prominent for the professional pitchers, happens right at the time of ball release, almost exactly at that time. This thing is what I would call a distraction force. A distraction force means a pulling, right? So the torque I talked about was a twisting. This is a pulling, making this thing longer, right? So what that means is that at the time of ball release, the arm is moving in the direction the ball is. The arm would like to just fly off and keep going with the ball, right? That's what the physics say it should do. I've just accelerated it to about 90 miles an hour. It should just keep going with the ball. Thank goodness it's attached, right? There's hopefully, actually in my shoulder there's not that many attachments anymore. It's kind of messed up. But for a healthy pitcher, there's muscles and soft tissues, ligaments, right, that hold everything in place. And so if those weren't there, literally the arm would keep going. But they are there, and they hold everything in place. But that distraction force also can be a source of potential injuries. Oops. Okay. Go back. Okay, so there's kind of an indication of that force, right? Pulling of the humerus outward. So We're lucky that we have soft tissues that keep that in place, but those soft tissues can get damaged in performing that job. And that's something we'll talk about here a little bit here. Okay, so I'm going to put these on quickly. So there's 3 kinds of injuries that are related to those distractions, okay, that pulling force. The first is called a rotator cuff tear. You've probably heard of that. You may have known somebody that's had a rotator cuff tear. What that means is that the muscles that cross the shoulder joint essentially get stretched, and one of them breaks, right? So there's this picture here is an MRI, and this white stuff right there is fluid. It's swelling where there's been a rip in the muscle, supraspinatus muscle. Something called a SLAP lesion. SLAP stands for superior labrum, anterior to posterior. This thing here is the scapula, okay, the shoulder blade. This is the socket for the shoulder, all right? So we're looking right into the socket of the shoulder. The arm has been removed in this case, right? And this little disc right here is the socket. Well, that socket has a thin edge of fibrocartilage running around the edge of it. It's kind of shaped like a triangle, like the bumper on a pool table. And that thing, the long head of the biceps tendon actually connects right to the top of that bumper. And what happens is that bicep muscle is one of the things that's actually helping decelerate the elbow as the elbow snaps forward. And it's also providing this compression across the shoulder joint. It's one of the things keeping your arm from flying off. And so while it's doing those things, it's pulling really hard. Sometimes it actually pulls its attachment right off of the underlying bone. Right? So a SLAP lesion is when this stuff really gets pulled off and pulled away like the handle of a bucket. It kind of rotates right away. And then finally, another thing that can happen, this one is related not so much to distraction, but this is related to the twisting, is something called a torsion fracture, a humeral shaft fracture. These are really rare, but as you can imagine, they're completely catastrophic when they happen. And you can see an example here. This is a very typical case. If you've ever taken a piece of chalk and twisted it, right, it would break in exactly that same way. So it's what's called a shear fracture, right? And that's a really common mechanism for fractures. We see them in other types of twisting accidents, like in skiing, for example. But in pitchers, it can happen from throwing. There's some kind of famous examples. So here's an example. This guy's name was Tony Saunders. He played for the Tampa Bay Devil Rays back in the late 90s. He was a professional pitcher, pitching in the majors. He actually suffered one of these fractures of his humerus while he was pitching in the game. And he was devastated, as you can imagine, but he rehabbed. He got all of the physical therapy. He might have even had surgery to repair the break when it happened. He made his way back up to the AAA. He was starting to play again, and it happened again. So that middle picture is actually him. He re-fractured pretty close to the site of where his original fracture had been. And the third picture there is him crying at his retirement ceremony, right? The guy's like 20-something years old, and he's retiring from baseball because he had these 2 catastrophic fractures. So those stories are sad, obviously, but it's really intriguing. What is it specifically about the way he throws, his anatomy, that combined to cause his humerus to shatter in a way that most people's never does, right? So that's the kind of things that I have been studying. Okay, so there's one other thing that can happen from the twisting motion, and this happens most likely primarily in kids. Okay, so it turns out that when we are born, actually when we're in utero, that the shape of our humerus, right, shown here on the slide, is a little different than it is once we're an adult. So if you actually looked at the humerus, I'm going to use my visual aid here again. This is super fancy, right? High tech just for you guys. So if this is my humerus, and these 2 things represent, just so you can see the axis of how it's oriented, right? So in most of us, the axis of the elbow, when I'm standing right here, is about like that, right? So if this represents the axis of the elbow. In babies, this is actually rotated like this. So actually compared to us, their arms are out this way. And over time, as they use their arms, slowly the shape of the humerus changes a little bit and becomes lined up more like this, like you know. Except in people that throw a lot, they actually tend to have a little bit more of this rotation. So it can actually be measured on an X-ray, for example, or a CT scan. You can actually measure the angle between these 2 sticks and actually see that there's a difference. And it's pretty dramatic in baseball pitchers, and it's thought to be basically that over time, while kids are pitching, and they still have open growth plates, that slowly the bone had been twisted like this. Normally it would be slowly rotating back for most of us, but for pitchers it gets delayed a little bit. It doesn't quite rotate back as much, it stays more twisted. So but what does that do? It means that when I'm throwing, I can get more external rotation, right? It means that I actually can't internally rotate quite as much because this whole thing is shaped a little differently, but I can get a lot of external rotation, which is good for pitching, right? I just told you that they can get 180 something degrees. So a little bit of that probably actually comes from the shape of their skeleton, and the rest of it comes from flexibility and velocity. Okay, so I'm going to move through this. I've already explained most of this. So hopefully I've given you a little indication of why baseball pitching, even if you're not a baseball fan yourself, can be kind of interesting, and there's some interesting insights we can get from how the mechanics and the motion actually leads to forces, and hopefully not injuries, but occasionally injuries and athletes. The loads are pretty big on the shoulder, and they change with time, and the type of load changes with time depending on what the pitcher's doing. We need a lot more research to understand how the specific mechanics of the person, how they move, actually affects their own body, their anatomy. And we also need to understand more about how, especially in youth pitchers, with their different body types than adults, how it affects them. And as I said before, one of the reasons I'm really interested in that, because there's lots and lots of little kids that are playing baseball or softball or t-ball, and I'd like to make sure that they learn how to throw and not get injured. So with that, I will turn it over, and I'll be happy to talk to you at the end. Thanks.